The rain had been falling for hours, turning the quiet suburban streets of Brightwood into rivers of murky water. 14-year-old Callan slipped on his 2 small rain boots and grabbed an oversized jacket before venturing outside. The storm was thrilling in a way, with the rumbling thunder and bursts of lightning that painted the sky. He had always been drawn to the chaos of weather, but this time it wasn't curiosity pulling him into the rain. His little sister Mila had accidentally left her favorite stuffed bear in the backyard, and it was his job to rescue it. Callan trudged through the downpour, holding a flashlight to guide his way. Water pooled ankle-deep in the street, spilling over curbs and onto lawns. The once familiar landscape of his neighborhood was unrecognizable under the deluge. The flashlight flickered, casting shadows across the swirling currents, and that's when he saw it. A small, shivering form huddled against a lamppost. At first, Callan thought it was a bundle of rags, but then it moved, and he caught a glimmer of eyes reflecting the light. It was a dog, drenched and trembling with a thin, wiry frame and matted fur that clung to its body. Its tail wagged feebly when Callan crouched beside it. "Hey there," he said softly, reaching out a hand. The dog hesitated, then nosed his palm with a cold, wet snout. "You're all alone out here, huh?" The dog didn't bark or growl, only whimpered as Callan gently wrapped his arms around it. It was surprisingly light, as if it hadn't eaten in days. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Callan knew the dog wouldn't survive the night out here. Without a second thought, he turned back toward his house, the dog pressed tightly against his chest. When Callan brought the dog inside, his parents were initially hesitant. His mom and nurse worried about fleas or disease, while his dad sighed heavily about the mess the dog would make. But Mila, clutching her soggy stuffed bear, immediately ran over to the dog and hugged it. "Can we keep it?" she asked, her wide eyes pleading. "We'll see," their dad said, though the tone of his voice suggested otherwise. The dog, which Mila quickly named Jasper, became part of their household over the next few days. Jasper was unlike any dog Callan had ever known. He was quiet, almost unnervingly so, rarely barking or even whining. He seemed intelligent, tilting his head as if he understood every word spoken to him. Callan felt an odd connection to Jasper, as if the dog were more than he seemed. The storm had passed, leaving the town of Brightwood battered but intact. School resumed, and life returned to normal. But Callan couldn't shake the feeling that Jasper wasn't just an ordinary stray. Little things started to happen. Objects moved from their usual places, like Callan's sneakers, ending up by the front door even when he'd left them in his room. Jasper seemed to appear and disappear at odd times, once showing up in the backyard when Callan could have sworn he was asleep in the living room. It was strange, but Callan shrugged it off. Maybe he was just imagining things. One evening, as Callan sat in his room studying for a science quiz, Jasper padded in and sat by his bed. Callan reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "What's your story, huh?" he asked aloud. Jasper looked up at him with those deep, intelligent eyes, and for a moment, Callan felt as though the dog might actually answer. The next morning, Callan woke to find a small, folded piece of paper lying on his desk. His name was scrawled on it in neat handwriting. He frowned, certain he hadn't left it there, and unfolded it. "Thank you for saving me." His breath caught, the note was unsigned, and there was no one in the house who would have left it. Mila could barely write her own name, and his parents weren't the type to leave cryptic messages. His eyes darted to Jasper, who lay curled on the rug. The dog looked up at him, tail wagging slightly. Callan shook his head. It was impossible. Dogs couldn't write notes. It had to be a prank. Maybe one of his friends sneaked in, though that made no sense either. He decided not to mention it to anyone. The next few days passed uneventfully, but the nagging feeling that something was off wouldn't go away. One afternoon, Callan took Jasper for a walk in the woods behind their house. It was their favorite spot, a quiet place where Callan could think. As they walked, Callan noticed Jasper kept stopping to sniff the air. His ears perked. Callan thought nothing of it until the dog darted off the trail and into the underbrush. "Jaspers, wait!" Callan called, chasing after him. He stumbled over roots and through bushes, the branches snagging his jacket. When he finally caught up, Jasper was standing in a small clearing, his nose pressed to the ground. At his feet was a strange, glowing object, half buried in the dirt. It looked like a stone, but it pulsed faintly with an inner light, shifting colors between blue and green. Callan reached out to touch it, but Jasper barked sharply, startling him. It was the first time Callan had heard the dog make a sound. He pulled his hand back, and the glow of the stone dimmed. "What is that?" Callan muttered, staring at Jasper. The dog barked again, then nudged the stone with his paw. As if understanding an unspoken command, Callan carefully picked it up. The stone was warm, almost alive, and a tingling sensation ran up his arm. From that moment on, things began to change. Callan started to notice small abilities. He could predict events just before they happened, like knowing when the phone would ring, or when someone was about to knock on the door. His reflexes improved too, catching a falling glass before it hit the ground, or dodging a stray soccer ball with ease. It was exhilarating but also terrifying. Jasper seemed to guide him through it all. The dog would nudge him towards certain paths during their walks, or bark insistently when Callan hesitated to make a decision. It became clear that Jasper knew more about the strange stone and its effects than he let on. One night, Callan decided to confront him. "I know you're not just a regular dog," he said, sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor with Jasper in front of him. "That stone, whatever it is, you knew it was there. You're connected to it, aren't you?" Jasper tilted his head, then stood up and walked to the window. He pawed at the glass, and Callan opened it. Jasper leapt onto the sill, then onto the ground below. Callan followed, heart pounding. The dog led him back to the woods, to the clearing where they had found the stone. But this time, the clearing wasn't empty. A tall figure stood in the center, cloaked in shadow. The figure stepped forward, and Callan saw that it was a woman, her eyes glowing the same color as the stone. "You've awakened it," she said, her voice echoing in the still air. "Awakened what?" Callan stammered. "The bond," she replied, "and with it, your destiny." As the words sank in, Callan realized that saving Jasper had been the start of something far greater than he could have imagined. The dog, the stone, and the mysterious woman were all connected, and now so was he. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same. Callan stood frozen, the woman's words swirling in his mind. The bond? His destiny? These weren't the kinds of things he thought about. He was just a kid from Brightwood who happened to rescue a stray dog. And yet, here he was, holding a glowing stone with a mysterious figure, and a dog that was clearly not just a dog. Jasper stood beside him, tail wagging as though everything were normal. Callan glanced at him, then back at the woman. "I don't understand," he said. "What bond? And who are you?" The woman's eyes softened, the glow dimming slightly. She knelt down, her cloak spreading like ink on the forest floor. "My name is Elsha," she said. "I am a guardian of the Lumis, a fragment of power from a time long forgotten." She gestured toward the stone in Callan's hand. "That is the Lumis, and it has chosen you." "Chosen me?" Callan repeated, his voice cracking. I didn't choose it. I just picked it up because Jasper found it." Elsha smiled faintly. "The Lumis does not bind itself to just anyone. It sensed your courage and kindness when you saved him." She nodded at Jasper, who barked softly, as though confirming her words. "But this is not a simple gift. The Lumis comes with responsibility." Callan shook his head. "I'm just a kid. I can't even pass my science quizzes without cramming. Why would it pick me?" "Because you acted without expecting a reward," Elsha said. That kind of selflessness is rare. Callan wanted to argue, to insist that there must be some kind of mistake, but when he looked at the stone, its faint glow seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. He couldn't deny the strange connection he felt to it, or the way Jasper had been acting since they found it. "So, what am I supposed to do?" Callan asked finally. Elsha rose to her full height, her figure towering but not intimidating. "There are others who seek the Lumis for their own purposes. They will sense its awakening and come for it. Your task is to keep it safe and to learn its power." The weight of her words settled on Callan like a heavy blanket. He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, the air around them shimmered. A low growl rumbled through the clearing, and Jasper's ears flattened against his head. Elsha stiffened. "They're here." A sudden burst of wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it a chilling howl. Shadows slithered between the trunks, coalescing into figures with glowing red eyes. They were humanoid, but their movements were unnatural, as though they were puppets pulled by invisible strings. "Stay behind me," Elsha commanded, her voice sharp. Callan obeyed, clutching the Lumis tightly as the shadowy figures advanced. Jasper stood in front of him, his stance protective, his fur bristling. Elsha raised her hands and a soft golden light radiated from her palms, illuminating the clearing. The shadows recoiled, but they didn't retreat. One of the figures lunged, and Elsha moved with a speed that left Callan breathless. She thrust her hand forward, sending a beam of light slicing through the air. The figure dissolved with a piercing screech, but more took its place. Callan felt a surge of panic. He was just a kid with a glowing rock. What could he possibly do against creatures like this? But then Jasper turned to him, his eyes locking onto Callan's with an intensity that seemed to speak directly to his soul. The message was clear. Trust yourself. The Lumis grew warmer in his hand, its glow intensifying. Without fully understanding why, Callan raised it above his head. A wave of light burst from the stone, washing over the clearing like a tidal wave. The shadowy figures writhed and screamed before vanishing into nothingness. When the light faded, the clearing was silent. Elsha lowered her hands, her expression unreadable. Jasper trotted over to Callan, nudging his leg as if to say, "Good job." Elsha approached him, her glowing eyes filled with something between admiration and concern. "You are more connected to the Lumis than I realized," she said. "But this is only the beginning." Callan exhaled shakily, his heart racing. What were those things? "Shades," Elsha replied. "They are drawn to the Lumis, seeking its power for their master, and they will return." "Great," Callan muttered. "So now I have shadow monsters after me." Elsha placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are not alone in this. Jasper is your guardian, and I will guide you. But you must prepare. The Lumis will not remain hidden for long." The walk back home felt surreal. Callan couldn't believe what had just happened, or the fact that his life was apparently tied to some ancient magical artifact. When he got back, he half expected his parents to notice something was off, but they were too busy with dinner preparations to ask where he had been. Mila hugged Jasper as usual, oblivious to the danger they had just faced. That night, as Callan lay in bed with the Lumis tucked under his pillow, he couldn't stop thinking about Elsha's words. Others would come for the stone, and he would have to protect it. But how could he protect something he barely understood? And what did it mean to learn its power? The answers didn't come easily. Over the next few days, Elsha began training him in secret, meeting him in the woods after school. She taught him how to channel the Lumis's energy, using it to create barriers of light or to sense danger before it arrived. Jasper proved to be an invaluable companion, his instincts sharper than any human's. Callan quickly realized that the dog wasn't just a guardian, he was a partner, one who seemed to understand the Lumis better than anyone else. But the more Callan learned, the more he realized how dangerous his situation was. The shades weren't the only threat. Whispers of a powerful enemy, someone who had been hunting the Lumis for centuries, reached them through Elsha's connections. This enemy, known only as Malgrave, was said to be relentless. Callan didn't want to be a hero. He wanted to play soccer, hang out with his friends, and worry about homework instead of magical stones and shadow creatures. But every time he looked at Jasper, he remembered why he couldn't walk away. He had saved the dog that night in the storm, and now Jasper was saving him in ways he couldn't have imagined. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, and Callan began to understand that their connection wasn't just about the Lumis. It was about trust, loyalty, and the courage to face the unknown together. When the final confrontation with Malgrave came, it wasn't just Callan's newfound abilities or the Lumis's power that made the difference. It was the bond he had with Jasper, the trust they had built through every challenge. Together they stood against the darkness and emerged victorious, their bond unbreakable. In the end, Callan realized that saving Jasper had been the best decision he had ever made. The dog's secret had changed his life forever, but it had also taught him the true meaning of bravery and the power of a loyal friend. The battle against Malgrave had left Callan exhausted yet victorious. The confrontation had been nothing short of harrowing. Malgrave, a towering figure cloaked in blackened armor, had wielded a dark force that seemed to sap the very light from the air. The Lumis pulsed with all its might in Callan's hand as the final moments played out in a storm of energy and resolve. Jasper had been instrumental, lunging at the exact moments Malgrave had attempted to close in. The dog had distracted, guarded, and even leapt into danger to protect Callan. Elsha's guidance and her radiant power had kept them from being overwhelmed. Yet, as the enemy was defeated and the clearing lay silent, Callan realized the victory came with more than just relief. It came with responsibility. The days following Malgrave's fall were a strange blend of peace and change. Callan returned to Brightwood, and though life tried to resume its normal rhythm, he couldn't see it the same way anymore. He would walk down his school's hallways, hearing the chatter of his classmates about movies, homework, and weekend plans, and feel as though he was living in a completely different world. Yet, despite the weight of everything that had happened, he found comfort in Jasper. The dog was more than a pet now. He was a confidant, a partner, and a guardian in every sense. Jasper seemed to sense Callan's every emotion, always there to nuzzle him when his thoughts grew too heavy or when the memories of the battle haunted his dreams. Elsha visited sparingly, appearing only in the woods to check on Callan's progress. Though the immediate danger had passed, she warned that others like Malgrave would rise. The Lumis was a beacon of light and power, and such things always attracted those who sought to exploit them. "You've done well, Callan," she said during one such visit, "but your journey with the Lumis is far from over." Callan frowned. "I thought defeating Malgrave would be the end of it." And here I took a breath, waited for it, and with it comes a lifetime of purpose. Elsha's glowing eyes softened. The Lumis is not something that can simply be put aside. It chose you because it sensed your potential, and that potential will continue to grow. Your bond with it, and with Jasper, is unique. But with it comes a lifetime of purpose. The thought weighed heavily on Callan. He was still just a teenager. How could he carry a responsibility that felt so much bigger than him? Yet he couldn't deny that the Lumis had become a part of him, and he didn't want to imagine life without Jasper by his side. The first signs of lingering danger appeared not long after. One afternoon, while Callan was kicking a soccer ball around in his backyard, Jasper suddenly froze. His ears perked, his stance stiff and alert. Callan paused mid-kick, following the dog's gaze toward the edge of the woods. At first, he saw nothing, but then a flicker of movement caught his eye. A shadow too sharp and deliberate to be cast by the swaying trees. It lingered just long enough for Callan to realize it wasn't natural before vanishing. Jasper growled, low in his throat, his hackles raised. Shades? Callan whispered, his pulse quickening. Jasper barked once sharply and darted toward the house. Callan followed, understanding immediately what the dog meant. They needed to call Elsha. Elsha arrived as dusk settled over Brightwood, her presence as otherworldly as ever. She listened intently as Callan described the shadowy figure. Her expression grew grim, and she knelt beside Jasper, who leaned into her touch. "It seems Mulgrave's defeat has not gone unnoticed," she said. "There are remnants of his influence, agents of the dark forces that empowered him. They will test your strength, Callan. They will seek to claim the Lumis." Callan swallowed hard. "Can't we destroy it? The Lumis, I mean? If it's causing all this, wouldn't that stop them?" Elsha shook her head. "The Lumis cannot be destroyed. It is a fragment of creation itself, a force that has existed since the beginning of time. To destroy it would be to unmake the balance of light and darkness." Jasper barked as if agreeing. Jasper sighed, running a hand through his hair. "So what do I do? Just keep fighting every shadow that comes after it?" "You must continue to grow," Elsha said. "Your bond with the Lumis gives you strength, but it also gives you insight. Trust it, and trust Jasper. Together, you can overcome whatever comes your way." Though her words were meant to reassure him, Callan couldn't help but feel the weight of her expectations. But as he looked at Jasper, the dog's unwavering gaze gave him the courage he needed. They had faced danger before, and they had prevailed. They could do it again. Over time, Callan began to understand the Lumis more deeply. Its power was not just a weapon. It was a guide, a beacon of light that helped him see beyond the surface of the world. He used it sparingly, learning to channel its energy to protect those around him rather than to attack. Jasper continued to be his greatest ally, his instincts sharper than ever. The dog seemed to know when danger was near even before Callan did, and together they became a team unlike any other. The remnants of Mulgrave's influence did not make their presence known immediately, but Callan knew they were out there. He could feel it in the way the Lumis occasionally pulsed in his pocket, a silent warning of threats yet to come. Despite the challenges, life wasn't all battles and danger. Callan found moments of normalcy, playing soccer with his friends, helping Mila with her homework, and even convincing his parents to let Jasper sleep in his room at night. These moments grounded him, reminding him that he was still just a teenager, despite everything he had been through. One evening, as Callan sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jasper rested his head on his lap. Callan absently scratched behind the dog's ears, his thoughts drifting. "Do you think we'll ever get a break?" he murmured. Jasper let out a soft huff, his tail wagging slightly. It wasn't exactly an answer, but it made Callan smile. No matter what lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. The Lumist might have changed his life forever, but it had also given him something irreplaceable, a bond with a loyal companion who would stand by his side through anything. And as long as they were together, Callan was ready for whatever the future held. Weeks passed, and the unease that had settled over Callan's life after the shadowy encounter began to fade. The Lumis, which he carried in a small pouch around his neck, hummed with a steady warmth, but had remained dormant. Jasper continued to be his constant companion, his sharp instincts and silent loyalty a source of strength. Callan found himself slipping into a cautious routine, half normal teenager, half unwitting guardian of an ancient artifact. Yet the peace was temporary, as Callan and Jasper both suspected. And when the next challenge came, it arrived not in the form of shadows or cloaked figures, but through something more personal. It started one evening when Mila burst into Callan's room, her wide eyes brimming with excitement. "There's a carnival in town. Dad says we can go tomorrow," she announced, practically bouncing on the balls of her feet. Callan smiled at her enthusiasm. "That sounds fun. Did you already pick what you want to do first?" The Ferris wheel, Mila declared before rushing off to make plans with their parents. Jasper, lying at the foot of Callan's bed, tilted his head as if in question. Callan shrugged. It's just a carnival. I think we've earned a day to relax. The Brightwood Carnival was a whirlwind of lights, laughter, and the scent of fried food. Callan found himself enjoying the distraction, even managing to win a stuffed animal for Mila at one of the game booths. Jasper, wearing a makeshift bandana as a collar, trotted alongside them, drawing smiles and pats from children and adults alike. But as the evening wore on, a strange feeling began to creep over Callan. The Lumis grew warmer against his chest, and Jasper started to grow restless, his ears swiveling as though listening for something just out of earshot. They were in line for the Ferris wheel when it happened. The lights of the carnival flickered, plunging the fairgrounds into momentary darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of confusion. The lights came back on, but something felt wrong, like a subtle shift in the air that only Callan and Jasper seemed to notice. Jasper growled low, his stance stiffening. Callan immediately scanned the area, his heart racing. That's when he saw them. Two figures standing at the edge of the carnival, cloaked in shadows that seemed to defy the glow of the lights. Their eyes glinted red, and their presence sent a chill down Callan's spine. "Mila," he said quickly, crouching to her level. "Stay with Mom and Dad, okay? Don't leave their side." Mila pouted but nodded, sensing the seriousness in his tone. Callan stepped away from the line, Jasper at his side, and moved toward the figures. His hand instinctively clutched the Lumis beneath his shirt. "You're braver than I expected, boy," one of the figures said as they stepped forward. Their voice was sharp and cold, cutting through the noise of the carnival. "But bravery will only take you so far." "What do you want?" Callan demanded, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. "The Lumis," the other figure replied. "Hand it over, and perhaps we'll let you and your little dog walk away." Jasper barked sharply, his stance aggressive. Callan placed a hand on his head, both to steady the dog and to steady himself. "You're not getting it," he said firmly. The figures moved as one, their shadowy forms elongating and twisting. The carnival around them seemed to blur and dim, as though the very air was being drained of light. Jasper leapt forward, intercepting the nearest figure with a ferocity Callan had never seen before. The other lunged for Callan, but the Lumis flared to light, sending out a wave of light that forced the figure back. The fight was chaotic. The figures moved with unnatural speed, their shadows shifting and reforming like smoke. Callan used everything Elsha had taught him, channeling the Lumi's energy to create barriers of light and blasts that pushed the attackers away. Jasper was a blur of motion, snapping and dodging with precision. But the attackers were relentless. One of them managed to slip past Jasper, closing in on Callan. For a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm him, but then Jasper was there, slamming into the figure with a growl that echoed like thunder. The Lumis pulsed in Callan's hand, its light intensifying until it was almost blinding. A surge of energy coursed through him, and he raised the stone high. The light exploded outward, engulfing the attackers in a radiant wave. When the light faded, the figures were gone, their shadows dispersed into nothingness. The carnival had returned to normal, the crowd oblivious to the battle that had taken place. Callan knelt beside Jasper, who was panting heavily but unharmed. "You okay, buddy?" Callan asked, running a hand through the dog's fur. Jasper licked his hand in response, his tail wagging weakly. A familiar voice broke the quiet. "You've done well." Callan turned to see Elsha standing a few feet away, her glowing eyes filled with approval. "You handled yourself better than I could have hoped," she said. "The Lumis is safe because of you." Callan shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. Jasper, he's the real hero." Elsha smiled. "You are both heroes. The bond you share is what makes you strong." Callan looked down at Jasper, who looked back at him with those intelligent, unwavering eyes. He thought about everything they had been through, the storm, the shadows, Malgrave, and now this. Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought them closer than he could have ever imagined. "What happens now?" Callan asked. Elsha's expression grew thoughtful. "The Lumis will always attract those who seek its power, but you have proven that you are more than capable of protecting it, and with Jasper by your side, I have no doubt you will continue to rise to the challenge." For the first time since the Lumis had entered his life, Callan felt a sense of peace. The responsibility was still daunting, but he knew he wasn't alone. Jasper would always be there, his loyal companion and protector. As the night settled over Brightwood, Callan returned to his family with Jasper at his side. The weight of Lumis was no longer a burden, but a reminder of the bond that had changed his life forever. Together, they were ready to face whatever the future held, their trust and loyalty unshakable. And in the quiet moments, when the world was still, Callan would look at Jasper and think about how it all began, with a storm, a flooded street, and a stray dog who had a secret.